The snow fell so quietly, even the dying held their breath. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. A place where ancient trees stood like cathedral pillars, their branches heavy with ice, their roots drinking the blood of two armies locked in winter's grip. The wind cut through the darkness with a sound like tearing canvas. And somewhere in that frozen hell, hidden beneath a camouflage net inside an M10 Wolverine tank destroyer, a man was about to make a decision that would save thousands of lives, by breaking every rule he'd been given. His name was Ray Thompson. A farm kid from Kansas who understood angles better than he understood people. A gunner who could calculate trajectories in his head while other men were still reaching for their slide rules. And on this morning, through a fogged periscope, he was watching 12 German tanks snake through the forest toward a vital crossroad. Tanks that would cut off the 101st Airborne Division trapped in Bastogne if they reached their objective. Thompson had no orders to fire. No permission to engage. No clearance from command. He was supposed to observe, report, wait. But Ray Thompson had spent 2 years studying how tanks moved, how formations worked, how one precisely placed shot could create a chain reaction of chaos. He'd watched friends burn because orders came too late. He'd seen the cost of waiting. And now, staring at that perfect German column crawling through the narrow forest road like a steel serpent, he understood something his commanding officers didn't. Sometimes the rules get men killed. 3 days earlier, in a drafty Belgian farmhouse that smelled of damp stone and old smoke, Thompson had sat through the briefing that would haunt him. The room was crowded with tank destroyer crews, their faces hollow from weeks of winter combat, their uniforms stiff with cold and dirt. The commanding officer, a captain from Pittsburgh named Langston, who spoke with the clipped efficiency of a man who delivered too many bad news, stood before a map covered in red and blue markings. "Gentlemen, the situation is this." Langston's finger traced the German offensive. On December 16th, the enemy launched their largest operation since France. Over 200,000 men. More than 1,000 tanks. Complete surprise. They've broken through in multiple sectors. The room absorbed this in silence. Every man there had seen German armor. They knew what 1,000 tanks meant. Intelligence indicates their objective is Antwerp. Langston continued. If they reach the port, they split our forces in two. Force a negotiated peace. The entire Allied position in Europe collapses. Someone in the back muttered something profane. Langston ignored it. Our role is observation and interdiction. You'll be deployed to key crossroads and approaches. You will observe enemy movements. You will report positions, strength, composition. But, his voice hardened. You will not engage without explicit orders from command. Is that understood? Heads nodded. But Thompson felt something cold settle in his stomach. Sir. He raised his hand. What if we can't reach command? Radio's been spotty. Weather's interfering with everything. Langston's expression suggested he'd been expecting this question and dreading it. Then you observe and wait for contact to be re-established. We cannot have friendly fire incidents. We cannot have units revealing positions prematurely. In this weather, with lines this confused, discipline is the only thing keeping us from shooting each other. Thompson understood the logic. He even agreed with it, intellectually. But war wasn't intellectual. War was watching a Panzer column advance while you sat there doing nothing because some radio operator couldn't get through the static. After the briefing, Thompson returned to his crew. They'd been assigned to a ridge position north of Noville, overlooking a forest road that intelligence indicated might be a German approach route. Might be. In December 1944, nobody knew anything for certain except that the Germans were everywhere and winter was killing men as efficiently as bullets. His crew was solid. Driver Corporal Jake Mitchell, steady and unflappable. Loader Private First Class Danny Chen, fast and precise. They'd been together since Normandy. They trusted each other with their lives because they'd already done exactly that a dozen times. So we sit and watch. Chen asked as they prepped the Wolverine. That's the order. Thompson checked the gun's traverse mechanism, making sure ice hadn't locked it up. And if Germans come through while we're waiting for permission to shoot? Thompson didn't answer. He was thinking about mathematics. About angles and timing. About the difference between following orders and doing what needed doing. The Wolverine was a good machine for what Thompson had in mind, though he hadn't consciously realized he had anything in mind yet. The M10 mounted a 3-inch gun that could punch through most German armor at range. It was faster than a Sherman, more maneuverable, with an open-top turret that gave excellent visibility if you were willing to risk being exposed. They drove to their position in the pre-dawn darkness, following frozen roads that crunched under their tracks. The ridge overlooked a narrow forest road hemmed in by thick trees and steep embankments. Perfect kill zone, Thompson noted automatically. Any vehicles caught in there would have nowhere to maneuver. They set up behind a stand of pines, draped the camouflage net, and settled in to wait. The cold was immediate and absolute. The kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals, that made metal burn bare skin, that seeped through every layer until you felt like you'd never be warm again. They took turns on watch, 2 hours each, huddling in their sleeping bags when off duty, trying to conserve body heat. Thompson kept a notebook. He always did. His mother had sent it months ago, just a simple spiral-bound pad, and he'd filled it with observations. How German tanks moved in formation. How long it took for turrets to traverse. Weak spots in armor. Range calculations. Wind effects. Everything that might matter in the 3 seconds between identifying a target and pulling the trigger. On his watch shifts, he scanned the road through the periscope, marking down everything. Frost patterns that indicated vehicle traffic. Tree damage from tank treads. Frozen ruts that suggested heavy movement. The forest told stories if you knew how to read them. By the second day, he was certain the road was being used. The patterns were consistent with German logistics. Moving at night, hiding during the day, using forest cover to avoid Allied aircraft. "They're coming through here," he told Mitchell during their evening meal of cold rations and colder coffee. "You report that?" "Tried. Radio's down. Atmospheric interference. Maybe. Or the set's just frozen." They sat in silence, breath fogging in the cramped interior. "So what do we do?" Chin asked. Thompson didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Orders said wait. Common sense said the same thing. One wrong shot could give away their position, bring down artillery, get them killed. Or worse, hit friendly forces that nobody knew were in the area. But Thompson kept thinking about timing. About how long it would take to get orders even if the radio worked. About how many American soldiers would die if German armor reached Noville unopposed. The decision that would change everything came on December 19th, just after dawn. Thompson was on watch, scanning the road through his periscope out of habit more than expectation. The fog lay thick in the valley, reducing visibility to maybe 800 yards. He was calculating how fog would affect a shot. Denser air meant fractionally different trajectory, when he saw them. Shapes moving through the mist. Dark silhouettes that resolved into the unmistakable profile of German armor. His breath caught. 1 tank. 2. 3. He kept counting. 12 vehicles total. The lead was a Tiger I, massive, lethal, its long 88mm gun capable of destroying anything the Americans had from ranges where American guns couldn't even reach it. Behind it came Panzer IVs, the workhorses of German armored forces. Then half-tracks carrying infantry. Support vehicles. Fuel trucks. It was a complete combat formation, moving with purpose toward Noville. Thompson's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't a patrol. This was an assault element. If they reached Noville, they'd flank the American positions at Bastogne from the north. The 101st Airborne, already surrounded, would lose their last supply corridor. Thousands of men would be cut off, starved out, destroyed. "Contact," he said quietly. 12 vehicles. Mixed armor and support. Heading 090. Mitchell was instantly alert. "Can you reach command?" Chin was already trying the radio, turning dials, adjusting frequencies. Static. Pure static. The atmospheric conditions that made winter warfare so miserable were also making communications impossible. "Nothing," Chin reported. "We're alone out here." Thompson watched the German column advance. They were moving cautiously but confidently, like men who didn't expect opposition. Why would they? This was supposed to be undefended territory. American forces were scattered, disorganized, reacting to the German offensive rather than controlling it. The mathematical part of Thompson's brain, the part that calculated angles and trajectories, was already working the problem. The road was narrow. Steep embankments on both sides. If vehicles were disabled at the right points, the entire column would be trapped. Third vehicle to create a roadblock. Sixth to jam the middle. Eighth fuel truck to cause chaos and destroy morale. It was elegant, clinical, perfect, but it required one thing: breaking orders. "We need to report this," Mitchell said. "Standard procedure. Correct procedure." "With what radio?" Chen countered. "Then we wait until we can re-establish contact. By then they're gone. And Noville's flanked." Thompson said nothing. He was still watching the column, calculating. They were at 800 yards now. Perfect range for the 3-inch gun. Perfect angle. Perfect target. "Sarge." Mitchell's voice carried a question that wasn't really a question. Thompson thought about the briefing. About Langston's explicit orders. About friendly fire. About revealing their position. About all the very good reasons why you didn't shoot without clearance. Then he thought about the 101st Airborne. About the paratroopers freezing in foxholes around Bastogne, running low on ammunition, food, medical supplies. About what would happen if this German column cut their supply line. He thought about a mechanic named Jimmy Delgado who'd burned alive in a half-track because orders to withdraw came 10 minutes too late. About Frank Murray, vaporized by a mine, because intelligence about the minefield arrived after his unit had already entered it. War ran on orders. But men died in the gaps between orders and reality. "Load armor-piercing," Thompson said quietly. Chen hesitated. "Sarge, we don't have authorization." "I know what we don't have. Load the gun." The shell slid home with a metallic click that sounded impossibly loud in the frozen morning air. Thompson adjusted the gun's elevation. Range 800 yards. Target the 3rd Panzer IV. Not the Tiger. That was too hard a target, too much risk of a non-penetrating hit that would just alert them. The Panzer IV. Thinner side armor. One good shot would immobilize it and create a roadblock. His hand touched the trigger. Cold metal against his glove. This was the moment. Everything else was preparation. This was the choice. Follow orders and watch Germans pass unopposed. Or break rules and maybe save thousands of lives. Or maybe get his crew killed and accomplish nothing. The German column kept advancing, oblivious. Thompson thought about angles. About controlled collapse. About how one stone pulled from a wall could bring the whole structure down if you knew where to pull. He pulled the trigger. The 3-inch gun spoke with a roar that shattered the morning silence. The recoil rocked the entire Wolverine. The armor-piercing shell crossed 800 yards in less than a second and struck the 3rd Panzer IV directly in the side. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. The tank's ammunition cooked off. Fire erupted from hatches. The vehicle lurched to a halt, effectively blocking the narrow road. The German column stopped. Confusion rippled through the formation. Thompson didn't stop. Reload. Target 6th vehicle. Half-track. Chen worked with mechanical precision, loading another round. Thompson shifted aim. The half-track was trying to reverse, its driver realizing they were under attack. Too late. The second shot punched through the half-track's thin armor and detonated the fuel tank. The vehicle exploded in a fireball that lit up the fog like a miniature sun. "Moving," Thompson said. They had to relocate before German gunners could triangulate their position. Mitchell gunned the engine. The Wolverine lurched sideways, repositioning behind another stand of trees. Thompson counted to 5. Long enough for German eyes to be tracking where they'd been, not where they were going. Target 8th vehicle. Fuel truck. The third shot was biblical. The fuel truck erupted in a blast wave that knocked nearby infantry off their feet. Flames shot skyward. The shock wave bent trees. Burning fuel spread across the road like napalm. The German column was no longer a column. It was chaos. The Tiger at the front tried to reverse, but vehicles behind were blocking it. Half-tracks attempted to deploy infantry, but the narrow road gave them nowhere to go. Officers shouted orders that nobody could hear over the roaring flames and exploding ammunition. Thompson kept firing. 4th shot. 5th. 6th. Each time relocating, using the terrain, making the Germans think they were facing an entire battery of tank destroyers instead of one unauthorized gunner. It was the firing pattern he'd studied for 2 years. Surgical disruption of German tactical doctrine. They relied on tight formations, mutual support, coordinated response. Destroy those elements, and even superior forces collapsed into confusion. By the time Thompson's gun went silent, ammunition running low, targets scattered, the German assault force was finished. Vehicles burned along the entire length of the road. Infantry had scattered into the woods. The survivors were retreating, convinced they'd stumbled into a major American defensive position instead of a single tank destroyer. The forest smelled of burning fuel, scorched metal, and cordite. The snow around them was blackened with soot. The road that had been a pristine winter scene 30 minutes ago now looked like the gateway to hell. Thompson sat back from the periscope. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "Jesus Christ," Mitchell whispered. Chen was staring at Thompson like he'd never seen him before. "Sarge, I know what we just did. Without orders. Without authorization. I know." They sat in silence, the enormity of it settling over them. Thompson had just violated direct orders from command. He'd engaged without authorization. In military terms, that was dereliction of duty. Court-martial offense. Prison, possibly. But the German column wasn't reaching Noville. The 101st Airborne supply line was still open. Thousands of men would live who might have died. Was following orders worth those lives? Thompson didn't know. He'd made his choice. Now he'd have to live with the consequences. "We need to report," Mitchell said finally. "With what radio?" But Chen was already trying again, and this time, either the atmospheric conditions had shifted or pure luck, static resolved into a crackling voice. "Repeat, all units report status." "This is Hammer 29, Chen transmitted. "Contact with enemy armor. Engaged and destroyed. Request instructions." Silence. Then, "Hammer 29, did you say engaged?" "Affirmative. 12 enemy vehicles. Mixed armor. Destroyed or dispersed." Another pause. Longer this time. Thompson could imagine the confusion at headquarters. Could imagine Langston's face when he heard that one of his units had opened fire without orders. "Hammer 29, stand by for command." They stood by. Waited. The fires burned lower. The morning sun finally broke through the fog, illuminating the destruction they'd caused. Thompson thought about Kansas. About his mother's kitchen where she taught 7th-grade math problems using pie dough and measuring cups. About his father's shop where engines were puzzles to be solved through patient observation and logical thinking. He'd approached war the same way. As a series of problems requiring solutions. The hedgerow was a problem. Solve it with the right angle of attack. The German formation was a problem. Solve it with precisely sequenced targeting. But people weren't problems. Orders weren't just obstacles to work around. There were reasons for rules, even in war. Especially in war. Hammer 29, command wants your position. Relief force inbound. They transmitted coordinates. Waited again. Thompson kept scanning for German counterattack, but none came. The survivors had reported back that they'd hit a major defensive position. Nobody was going to probe that again without serious preparation. 2 hours later, American forces arrived. Infantry, more tank destroyers, even a few Shermans that had somehow navigated the frozen roads. And Captain Langston, his face unreadable. He found Thompson standing beside the Wolverine, watching engineers examine the destroyed German vehicles. "Sergeant Thompson," sir. Thompson came to attention. Langston studied him for a long moment. You want to explain what happened here? Lost radio contact. German column approaching critical objective. Assessed immediate threat to Noville and Bastogne supply corridor. Engaged to prevent. Engaged without authorization. Yes, sir. Directly violating explicit orders. Yes, sir. Langston's jaw worked. You understand I should court-martial you? Yes, sir. You understand you risked your crew, risked revealing our positions, risked friendly fire? I understand, sir. Langston turned to look at the wreckage. Engineers were counting destroyed vehicles, documenting the engagement. A major from Division Intelligence was taking photographs, interviewing Thompson's crew. 12 vehicles, Langston said quietly. You destroyed 12 vehicles with one tank destroyer. Disabled them, sir. The fires did most of the work. Don't be modest, Sergeant. I've seen the pattern. 3rd, 6th, 8th targets. Precisely calculated to create maximum disruption with minimum ammunition expenditure. This wasn't luck. This was surgical. Thompson said nothing. Langston sighed. Division wants your after-action report. They want diagrams of your targeting sequence. They want to understand how one gunner accomplished what should have required an entire battery. Am I being court-martialed, sir? I don't know yet. Langston's voice was honest. What you did violated orders. Clear as day. But what you did also probably saved the 101 SD supply line. Scouts from Bastogne confirmed that road was the only viable approach for German armor from that sector. If you'd waited for authorization, those tanks would have reached Noville. Thousands of paratroopers would have been cut off. He paused. So I have to decide whether to punish you for breaking rules or thank you for saving lives. And right now, Sergeant, I don't have a goddamn clue which is right. The investigation took 3 days. Thompson was interviewed by officers from Division, from Corps, from Intelligence. They examined his notebook, the 2 years of observations about German tactics and vulnerabilities. They studied the wreckage, reconstructing the engagement. They interviewed his crew, confirming the radio was genuinely dead, that Thompson had acted without ability to contact command. The conclusion was complicated. Thompson had violated orders. That was indisputable. But he'd done so in circumstances where following orders would have resulted in significantly worse outcomes. The German column would have flanked Bastogne. The situation was already chaotic enough that conventional command and control had broken down. Thompson had exercised battlefield judgment in the absence of communications. Moreover, and this seemed to matter more than Thompson expected, his methods were being studied by the Army's artillery school. The controlled collapse firing pattern, using minimal ammunition to create maximum disruption. The understanding of how to turn enemy formations against themselves. You're not being court-martialed, Langston told him on December 23rd. Thompson felt something uncoil in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or just exhaustion. You're also not being decorated, Langston continued. Command doesn't want to encourage unauthorized initiative. Bad precedent. But they're not punishing you either. Officially, you defended your position against enemy attack. That's the story. Understand? Yes, sir. Unofficially, Langston's voice dropped. You did something remarkable. You saw a problem, calculated a solution, and executed it perfectly. You saved lives. Just, he hesitated. Try to get authorization next time, okay? Thompson almost smiled. I'll try, sir. But there wasn't a next time. Not like that. The Battle of the Bulge ground on through December and into January, but Thompson's unauthorized engagement at Noville became something else. A case study. An example of flexible tactical thinking. The diagrams from his notebook were sent to artillery schools, where they taught future gunners about sequential targeting and formation disruption. Thompson himself went back to being just another tank destroyer sergeant. He survived the war, returned to Kansas, married Helen from the next town over. Started that repair shop near Dodge City. Raised kids who never quite understood why their father would sometimes stare at the horizon with a look that suggested he was calculating angles nobody else could see. He didn't talk about the war much. When pressed, he'd mention Normandy, the hedgerows, the long cold winter. He never mentioned the unauthorized engagement. Never claimed to be a hero. In his mind, he'd just done what needed doing when the radio was dead and the rules didn't fit reality. But decades later, military historians found the reports. The after-action analysis. The diagrams that had influenced post-war tactical doctrine. They tracked him down, this old man in Kansas who'd once rewritten the rules of engagement in a frozen forest. "Do you regret breaking orders?" a historian asked in 1985. Thompson thought about it for a long time. About Langston's anger and eventual understanding. About the lives saved and the rules violated. About the uncomfortable truth that sometimes doing the right thing meant doing the wrong thing. "I regret that I had to choose," he said finally. "In a perfect world, you follow orders and that's the right thing. But war isn't perfect. Sometimes you have to decide between what you're told to do and what you know needs doing." He paused, looking out at the Kansas plains where grain silos stood like sentinels under an endless sky. "I made my choice. I'd probably make it again. But that doesn't mean it was easy. Or that I'm sure it was right. It just means that when you're sitting in a tank watching an enemy column that's about to kill thousands of your people, and you can't reach command, and you have maybe 30 seconds to decide." He trailed off, then smiled slightly. "Sometimes you just pull the trigger." Ray Thompson died in 1963, largely unknown outside military circles. His obituary mentioned service in World War II, a career as a mechanic, a family man who preferred fixing things to talking. It didn't mention the day he saved thousands of lives by breaking every rule. But in the archives at Fort Sill, in the tactical doctrine that shaped modern artillery practice, in the understanding that rigid adherence to rules can sometimes cost more than it saves, his legacy persists. One gunner. One decision. One moment when the rules said wait and necessity said act. The snow still falls in the Ardennes. The forests still stand. And somewhere in those frozen woods, if you know where to look, you can still find the rusted hulls of German tanks destroyed by a sergeant who understood something essential about war. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet man doing the math, calculating the angles, understanding what needs doing. And then, when orders fail and time runs out, pulling the trigger, not out of defiance, but out of deeper duty. Not to the rules, but to the men whose lives hang in the balance when you're the only one who can act. The only one who knows. The only one who understands that sometimes saving lives means breaking the rules that were written to save them.